Drug dealer grandma. Now, this granny's got more than just butterscotches and tissues in her purse. And that smell? Well, it's not her dental cream. It's the rank odor of crime. Darlene Mays, a 75-year-old grandmother living in Veneta, Oklahoma, puts most drug dealers to shame. Police had an inkling that this little old lady was doing something illegal, but when they raided her home in April of 2012, they couldn't believe what they discovered. They found 4 pounds of marijuana, a few guns, and $276,000 in cash. Not only was she involved in drugs, but she was the leader of a drug ring that had business across 4 states. Her son and former business partner, Jerry Van Dorsey, admitted to getting her involved in the drug business 5 or 6 years before the raid had occurred. And given that he was cut out of the business due to his meth addiction, he got his revenge by tipping off the police to his mother's activities. How about that for some familial love? Despite her original sentence of 15 years in prison, the case was dropped just before her 74th birthday, all due to lack of concrete evidence. Now, we're left wondering, what more evidence do you really need than pounds of marijuana, a cache of guns, and enough money to buy a house outright? Regardless, this is one bad granny. Strapped for cash. Apparently, Social Security just wasn't cutting it. So what do these elderly men decide to do? Well, rob a bank, naturally. In April of 2010, former mobsters, 73-year-old Jerry Scalise, 71-year-old Arthur Rachel, and 69-year-old Robert Poulier were plotting to rob LaGrange Bank in Chicago. Not only that, they were also planning on robbing the home of late former mob leader Angelo La Patra. Now, this wasn't just any off-the-cuff plan. In fact, it was very well thought out. They considered every detail and watched the bank closely to time their crime perfectly. They ensured the weight of the money bags wouldn't fracture one of their hips or throw out their backs. They also monitored the guards and where they would be at any given time, and they were sure to know when the delivery trucks would be arriving and departing. They had the perfect plan, so what could go wrong? Well, at first, nothing really. They walked into the bank with masks and handguns and successfully stole $100,000. Given that they were under investigation by the FBI, though, the robbery led right back to them, and police caught them attempting to break into Angelo's house. And that was that. However, this wasn't Scalise and Rachel's first rodeo. They were arrested and served 13 years for robbing a jeweler in London of a 45-carat Marlboro diamond. Now, we think we know what inspired Scalise. However, he was a technical consultant for Public Enemies, a bank robbery film. Whatever the reason, these 3 old men clearly weren't satisfied with simply collecting Social Security and plotting chess moves. Sandy Jello. Now, who wants to pay for something when you can find a way to get it for free? That's what this elderly couple did, except they weren't exactly clipping coupons. In 2009, Long Island husband and wife, 68-year-old Alexander Clement and 64-year-old Christine Clement, bought a surplus of packages of Jell-O pudding mix from various stores, but then returned them all shortly after their purchase. As it turns out, they took out the pudding mix and replaced it with salt and sand, earning them a profit of $1.40 for each returned box. But this old couple definitely wasn't greedy. Instead of keeping all of their stolen pudding for themselves, they decided to share amongst their friends. Now, there are few things that old people love more than free pudding. So, had their plan worked, they would have been heroes. However, when Jell-O customers began complaining that instead of opening the box to find the magical powder, they found sandwich baggies full of sand, they then reported them to the store. While they never intended to cause any harm, the two were eventually caught and arrested. Who would have thought someone would go that far for some free pudding? Would you? Let us know in the comments below. Toys for Granny. Now, the next time your grandparents come to your house for the holidays, bearing tons of gifts, you may want to ask where they came from. That's because 73-year-old Virginia Kelly, who just so happens to be a foster mother and president of the Latino Foster Parents Association, turned out to be a real-life Grinch, stealing Christmas from poor children for years. Unlike most people who pick up a few extra shifts at work or maybe even a seasonal job for a little extra holiday spending money, this little old lady had her own entrepreneurship up her sleeve. She stole toys from the Toys for Tots program, a U.S. Marine Corps program that distributes toys to children that may not otherwise have anything under the Christmas tree. And as it turns out, she had been stealing them to give to her foster children, which may have been a redeeming quality, but instead she ended up selling them for profit. After she was arrested, police found more than 11,000 toys in her home, which equates to about $375,000, and her foster children were removed. She showed no remorse, refusing to apologize, so she was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 120 days of home confinement, and 3 years of probation. Virginia's heart, unlike the Grinch's, did not grow 3 sizes that day. Playing with fire. Now, if you think you hate your in-laws, check this one out. This family drama all started with a marriage and a dowry. In Mumbai, India, Neelam Thorat's father refused to meet the dowry demands of 62-year-old Mangal Bharat Thorat after her marriage to Sunil Thorat. So what does Mangal do? Well, he kills her, of course. Following an argument with Neelam, Mangal beat the poor 19-year-old newlywed, poured kerosene all over her body, and then set her on fire. She would later die at Bhatia Hospital with 85% of her body scorched. However, Mangal wasn't the only guilty party here. Neelam's father-in-law and husband were said to be behind the scheme as well, but then there wasn't enough evidence to officially convict them. This crime did not go unpunished by any means, however. Mangal was rightfully sentenced to life in prison, not that she has much life left to live. After hearing this story, you may want to call up your mother-in-law and tell her that you love her. At least she hasn't set you on fire. Hopefully, that is. Don't mess with Grandpa's cash. If you think you'd like to have a career helping the elderly, you may want to reconsider. The year was 2009 when James Amburn, an American financial advisor living in West Germany, had invested approximately $2,496,500 on behalf of a bunch of elderly German pensioners, promising a 12% return. The problem with all of this? He lost it all. So 2 of his clients who lived over 300 miles away showed up at his house. Just to discuss the matter late one evening, and they waited outside until he returned from the bar. After inviting them in for a beer and to discuss the issue, 74-year-old Roland and 61-year-old Will bound him up with duct tape, threw him into a specially crafted wooden box, drove him back to Roland's house, and kept him in an underground cell for 4 days, where they beat him and demanded $1.4 million in ransom. The only time that he was let out was to send a fax to request money from the bank that he worked at. Thankfully for him, the elderly don't seem to be too incredibly tech-savvy, and Amburn was able to send a coded message to whoever received it to call the police. After several failed escape attempts and 2 broken ribs, someone at the bank finally caught on to his hidden messages, and he was rescued. Roland, Will, and their wives were all convicted and jailed. The moral of the story? Don't invest large sums of money on behalf of the elderly. The geriatric Bonnie and Clyde. This husband and wife duo proves that not all old people should be trusted. Ray, who was no stranger to theft and forgery, married Faye soon after he was released from jail due to petty crimes. As their need for money increased with each child born into their family, Ray's crimes would intensify. He began employing homeless people to purchase cattle at the market using his bad checks, then selling the cattle and keeping the money for himself without ever seeing his hired help again. Eventually, police caught on to his tactics, and he ended up in jail. It was then that he decided to up his game and began eliminating these farmhands himself after he was done with them. It worked. That was until former farmhand Jack McCormick would go on to alert the police of his criminal activity and attempt to kill him. In 1989, the Copeland home and its property was searched, and police found the bodies of 5 men and a rifle that was used to murder them, along with a quilt that was made out of the victim's clothing. While they passed away before their sentence, Ray and Faye Copeland, ages 76 and 69, were the oldest people to receive a death sentence in American history. And now for some honorable mentions. It seems that sometimes you never stop being a delinquent. Britain's own Dennis O'Brien started shoplifting when he was just 9 years old. And now, at the age of 80, not much has changed. In 2010, O'Brien was convicted and jailed for theft, forgery, and handling stolen goods. And thus far, he has had 35 convictions for 70 crimes and has been put away 13 times for various incidents, including arson, burglary, and forgery. Our next criminal sentence may inadvertently be life in prison. It was 2009 when Mr. Adebayo of Ogun State, who was said to be about 114 years old at the time despite lack of confirmation, was arrested for the possession of marijuana. Over 14,000 pounds of marijuana, that is. Now, if his age is correct, he will be the oldest man in prison, so it's safe to say that he'll definitely get some seniority. Our next crime earned the title of largest burglary in English legal history. And of course, it was committed by a bunch of old guys. While old, they were definitely seasoned veterans. Once the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company locked its doors for Easter in 2015, 4 elderly men ranging from ages 58 to 76 entered the area through a lift shaft and then drilled holes into the nearly 20-inch thick vault wall to get around the main vault door. Luckily for them, an unrelated major underground electrical fire broke out on the Kingsway Road in London, temporarily distracting emergency services and allowing the criminals to get away with approximately $14,830,200 worth of jewelry and other valuables. However, their victory would be short-lived. The 4 men, as well as 4 others, were arrested, and 7 out of the 8 were convicted and either sent to prison or jail, and the company went into liquidation as a result, proving that you're never too old to make an impact. This rap sheet is just proof that because you're old doesn't mean you're automatically disqualified from being a suspect in a major crime. And these are just